All right. So, as a tool for helping you reimagine Avatar a little bit as a Pocahontas film, I wanted to look at a scene very near the end of the movie where it goes to the classic Pocahontas love story where she rescues the John Smith equivalent in the narrative. And there's so much that's different here of the Pocahontas story, but so much that's the same. You see this alien woman as alien and yet so familiar. She's the sort of Pocahontas fantasy projected into the future. Notice the lush environment and consider the environmental context and the anxiety about the environment that marked the beginning of the 21st century. We're in the environmental crisis, Iraq War era, and the post 9/11 era, and there's a whole dramatic charge here that we can explore as Avatar reinvokes the Pocahontas myth. So let's watch a little, and I'll just try to share a few ideas that come up. So it's interesting here that his crisis is literally a metaphor for the environmental crisis, right? He can't breathe. There's no air. Even though he's in this lush, beautiful world, there's no air. So there's an interesting commentary going on there. And the whole film is the battle, right, between the Earth aggressors and their desire for natural resources and the indigenous people who have this spiritual connection to the landscape that is also a survival commodity connection as well. And so these classic kind of tropes that we've been seeing since the very first Pocahontas narrative, they're here again, but now they're in a new context. And so they comment in a different way. You know, the original John Smith wasn't concerned about destroying the environment at all. It was an unlimited resource, right? But here we are 400 years later, and literally almost exactly 400 years later, and look at how much the context has changed.
Jake. Jake, my Jake.
So this is something that's been going on since we first had to turn the Pocahontas story, the original story, which is actually a story of tribal conflict with invading Anglos, a story of kidnap, a story of premature death after a dangerous trip to Europe. It's turned into a romance, and it's the interracial romance that remains at the crux of the story. It's the common thread through everything we've looked at. And that desire for romance is really interesting, right? Because it represents a desire for interracial mixing. So it's a gesture towards equality. But in many of the early narratives, the terms are on the white person's terms, right? So we think in the Indian Princess how the Pocahontas figure has to basically assimilate and accept white superiority, almost worship that white superiority. But here in Avatar, it's switched. It's the white culture that's being criticized. It's the white culture that needs to be saved by the Native American so that the white person can join the Native culture. and walk away from his white culture. So it's as if things have totally reversed, where in Avatar it's the white Smith / Rolf character who has to convert. And that's an interesting reversal of the narrative that has a lot to do with what's happened in the 400 years of American life since the original story, and the 200 years since the 1808 play we just finished reading.
I see you.
I see you.
So this is an interesting moment, right? Because they see each other in their different forms, and their love transcends race. And this is, of course, the American dream, right? Nobody wants race to be a continuing conflict in our country. But I think we all know that we have to confront it and deal with it, and we're not as past it as we'd like to believe. But these kind of moments in film offer us a hope, right? Offer us a hope that we can transcend that. In a way, that is what the Pocahontas narrative has always been about, right? How can whites and natives come together? How can the European and the indigenous come together? How can the earth and this indigenous species on another planet come together? And how any culture imagines that coming together, despite the realities that are often opposite to that, is really interesting and really powerful. So in this one scene, I've been trying to talk about how nature is played out here. I've been trying to talk about how race plays out here. A third thing to think about is gender. This Pocahontas is very powerful, right? She's the one who teaches Jake to survive, but ultimately, as we read in our piece from the New York Times by David Brooks, ultimately the movie emphasizes the man as the salvational hero. And I think the way Avatar tries to protect its feminist narrative is this scene here. That as powerful as Jake is, as salvationally as he is for this indigenous people, he still can't make it without her saving him. So it's an attempt to sort of reconcile all these complex debates over gender and race and environment that inform the film. Now, when you pick a scene to write about, I don't want you to write or talk about 3 different tensions as I've done here. I want you to zoom in on one and look at all the details that connect to that one. But I wanted to take a little time to explore 2 or 3 so you could see how rich the film is. And this is just a tiny little scene that I wouldn't even argue is one of the richer scenes in the film. I just picked it out because it's easy for me to video it and comment on it because it's in YouTube. And it's very hard for me to do that on my DVD player with the film itself. So I hope this gives you some ideas on how you can think about and play with and interact with this film. And I look forward to seeing your ideas in Blackboard. Thanks.